What do you do when you have a melody floating in space all by itself, and you want to choose chords to play underneath that melody? Or maybe you have a chord progression already, but want to know your options for changing it. These two videos will attempt to give you some basic tools to accomplish this. We'll focus on simpler folk or pop melodies, but the principles should apply to any style of 12-tone music. If you don't already understand the basics of music theory, watch my short 3-part Music Theory Distilled series first. These videos will assume you understand most of the concepts covered there, specifically relative versus absolute pitch names, scales, the naming of chords, chord voicings, and a basic grasp of rhythm. Remember to check the description for corrections and clarifications. We can refer to the process of choosing chords for a melody as harmonizing a melody. A great deal of the related tools and tricks come down to pattern recognition. You can learn to notice common melodic phrases, or common chord progressions, or common musical ideas that a particular genre is known for. So there's no consistent, robotic procedure you can use to figure out what chords are best with a given melody. There will usually be many good options. In the Music Theory Distilled videos, we visualized pitch on a horizontal line with notes as vertical tick marks. For this video, we will turn this line on its side. Now pitch goes from low to high as you move up the screen. The note positions are horizontal lines across the screen, and time moves from left to right. This is conceptually similar to standard music notation, but of course it is not the same thing. Here is a short melody. I'm showing you all the notes of this melody on the screen, but only for visual reference. As we proceed, we will pretend as if we are only hearing them, without any knowledge of their actual locations. To harmonize a melody, we start by determining the scale in use, which will also tell us the key of the music. You could deduce the scale by using your knowledge of specific scales, studying the intervals between each note, and statistically ruling out options one by one until you have the most likely candidates. Especially as a beginner, you might have to work that way. But the more your ear develops, the more you can recognize a scale by pattern recognition, or by using tricks, just as you can recognize a friend without having to statistically analyze their facial features. Trick number 1. Find the tonic by ear. The tonic is the root note of the scale. This is the first thing you should start training your ear to hear. Sometimes the melody, or sections within the melody, will start and/or end on the tonic note. The melody might visit the tonic a little more often than other notes. There can be a sense of finality or closure when a melody ends on the tonic. In general, there is no simple automatic procedure to find the tonic. The most common mistake beginners make is to confuse the fifth for the tonic, since it can also provide a sense of finality. But other notes can trick you as well. Let's go back to our example melody. It starts on this note. This is not the tonic, even though the melody starts with it. It's actually the fifth. You might have noticed a temporary sense of closure here, and there is a strong sense of closure at the end. This is in fact the tonic. Teaching someone to identify the tonic is a bit like trying to teach them to identify the color blue. You can point to something and say, "There, that's blue," but you can't really describe how the recognition happens internally. It just takes practice. You can try to identify the tonic of your favorite popular music and then check your work by finding the chords online, which will sometimes name or reveal the key, or by asking for help from a friend. It's hard to overstate how useful a skill this is. Finding the tonic is often the most important step in unlocking the mysteries of a melody. This is not a skill that takes years to master. You're probably able to get pretty close already, and with a little bit of conscious attention, combined with a growing vocabulary of common melodic lines, you'll find yourself easily picking out the tonic most of the time, and in the cases where you make a mistake, realizing it quickly when you try to move forward with the mistaken tonic. Take heart and keep practicing. If there's enough demand, I could make a video dedicated to going through a bunch of examples and practicing identification of the tonic. Once you have picked the tonic, use an instrument to determine what specific note it is. This tonic note happens to be a G. Trick number 2. Test if the key is major or minor by playing a chord. We know the tonic is a G, but we have not yet determined the key, just the isolated tonic note. Most of the time we will be dealing with a major or minor scale. Fortunately, almost anyone can tell by ear if a melody is in a major or minor key once they know the tonic. All you have to do is play the associated major and minor chords, preferably when the melody is on or near the tonic note, and see which works better. So in this case, let's look at the end of the melody where it descends to the tonic and try a G major chord. Nope. How about a G minor chord? Ah, much better. Now, you may have enjoyed the interesting sound of the major chord. That's fine. But the minor chord is the more consonant choice, meaning it is less challenging to the ear. So this melody is in the key of G minor. And that means that a G minor chord is the 1 minor. The 1 minor chord uses the 1, flat 3, and 5 notes. So let's highlight the associated pitch lines to show that we now know them to be in the scale we are uncovering. Trick number 3. Look for runs of notes and pattern match. We now know the key, but we still need to figure out the rest of the scale notes in use. Remember, there are lots of different major and minor scales. Melodies often jump around in the scale, but sometimes a melody will make your life easier by hitting every note in a section of the scale without jumping around. For example, the Christmas carol Joy to the World actually begins with a walk down the entire major scale, giving us a clear indication of the scale in use. In this part of our melody, we see a little run of notes. This really looks like a run down a scale. It is of course possible that some of these in-between notes are actually in the scale, and this part of the melody just happened to skip those in-between notes. But no common scales have more than one half step in a row, so we can probably assume that's not the case. This turns out to be a run down a minor scale from the 5 to the 1, a very common musical phrase you can learn to identify easily. There, now you know it forever. For example, in the Christmas carol, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, the Merry Gentlemen is this same run of notes. Of course, we already knew our scale was minor since the key was minor. But if you check these notes with an instrument, we can see that this run used the natural 2 and natural 4 notes. We now know they are in the scale as well. Our scale is starting to take shape. Again, in this video, you have the benefit of just looking on the screen and seeing where the notes are. But remember that we are pretending that we are doing this by ear, so recognizing this little run is a helpful way to get our bearings. Trick number 4. Sing or play the scale by ear. You might surprise yourself with how many of these patterns your brain already contains. Even if you don't have labels for what you are hearing, your brain has been doing its own study of music theory since you were in the womb. To access this intuitive knowledge, it can be helpful to try to sing or play the scale the melody is using. After you've listened to the melody many times, try humming or singing the notes of the scale, or noodling on your instrument. Start by finding any one of the notes of the melody. If you know what note you are starting on, that will be helpful, but just pick a note, and try to move to the next note up or down in the scale. Don't overthink it, just stay loose, and hunt around until you find the next note that seems appropriate. Travel up and down the scale. Try to cover an entire octave. If you get lost, play the actual melody a couple more times. If this method comes naturally for you, it can be a great way to let your subconscious brain do the work. If you find a scale that seems correct, you can go note by note and identify each one. Of course, it's possible to get a note or two wrong, so you'll have to compare your work with the melody. Just remember that sometimes your brain knows more than you do. Trick number 5. Take some wild guesses. You can't always just try scales at random to see if they sound right. Maybe you suspect that the melody is in some kind of major key. You could just go through each of the 12 major scales until you find one that sounds right. It's a slow process and not recommended as a general method, but if you're stuck, it can work, and you'll get some scale practice on your instrument at the same time. Trick number 6. Use knowledge of the genre. Don't forget to apply knowledge of the genre you are working in, since the genre may favor certain scales or keys. For example, if you are working out a bluegrass tune, the G major scale is a very good first guess. If none of these tricks do the job, you might need to figure out the key more methodically. Write down all the different notes used in the melody, order them from low to high, and do some pattern matching. If you have memorized some scale shapes, you might be able to see a pattern of steps and half steps that lines up with a scale you know. For example, the classic major scale has those half steps between the 3 and 4 and the 7 and 8. These can act as a fingerprint for the scale. If you suspect that your tune is using a major scale, and you see 2 notes a half step apart, the higher of those 2 notes is either the tonic or the 4th. Choose one, give it a try, and see how it sounds. Even if it's actually the 4th, you can determine the tonic from there. This all may sound difficult, But if you are familiar with just 3 or 4 common scales, this will get easier very quickly. Simply memorizing the major scale and its 6th mode, also known as the natural minor scale, will get you a very long way in modern music. So far, we have determined that this melody uses a standard minor scale from the 1 to the 5. If we find these 2 notes by ear, we see that it also has a flat 6 and a flat 7. We can recognize this as the good old natural minor scale. Except, hang on, what's this natural 7 note doing down here? Well, recall from the previous videos that not every melody behaves perfectly. The fact that this note only appears once in our melody can be interpreted a couple of ways. Maybe we are using a rare scale that has a 1, a 7, and a flat 7 in it. But scales that use 3 half steps in a row aren't very common, at least for a melody like this. More likely, this is just one of those cases where the melody diverges from the scale in use. We will have to contend with that when we come up with our chords. Don't be too surprised by strange behavior. You might even find that these strange moments are your favorite parts of a melody. And remember that some melodies are much crazier than this. Some have no discernible key. Some start in one key but change key several times. So, the scale for this melody is the natural minor scale rooted at G. A couple of closing points. Number 1. If you were using this process to figure out the scale of a different melody that you had in your head, you might find that the tonic note you rooted your melody at is inappropriate for your genre or instrument. For example, if you were humming a bluegrass fiddle melody, and it turned out that you were humming the melody in the key of F sharp major, you probably want to move the entire melody up a half step to G, which is a far more comfortable and common key for a bluegrass fiddler. This is called transposing, and to do it, you just move every note and chord in the melody up or down the same number of half steps. From F sharp to G, you would just move every note and chord up a half step. Number 2. Many melodies make use of the major or minor pentatonic scales. These scales only have 5 notes in them, instead of the 7 notes in most major and minor scales. If we are really going to create our chords using only our scale notes, this would have some strange implications. For example, the 5 chord uses the 5, 7, and 2 notes, but the 7 note is not in the major pentatonic scale. So if we were being strict, we wouldn't use the 5 chord with a major pentatonic melody. In practice, the 5 chord is quite commonly used with major pentatonic melodies. For the purposes of chord choice, we can treat the major pentatonic scale like the traditional major scale. Similarly, for the minor pentatonic scale, we can fill in some version of a minor scale when it comes to choosing chords. Often, we use the natural minor scale for that. In part 2, we will use our scale to choose chords for the melody. I hope this video was useful to you. These videos do take weeks to produce, so if you had like 50 cents or $1 or $1,000 or $1,000,000, there's a link down there in the hoop-de-hoop for donations. Thanks.